I do think this is gorgeous. I am so glad I went to all that trouble of using the different colours and everything. It's quite different. It's not the usual vintage style-ish, but it's very pretty. And now we're going to work on the underarm elastic. So we want to actually work on underarm elastic now. So we're going to pin the picot towards the outer edge with the picots in, pinning with a slight pull, maximizing the pull around the edge around the underarm. When you get to here, you were going to hold the channeling back, keep going all around the edge to the edge, keeping this seam in that way and all around to the edge. So we're going to pin that and then stitch with a standard zigzag, and I'll come back to you when I've got that far. Now, I can't remember if I said you will also need to turn this back at the side seam. I actually then put channeling over the top of that when I've in the next step, which I'll get to. And I'm going to stitch this with a standard zigzag, 3.5 wide, 1.5 long, with the zigzag butting up against the edge of the picot there. So that's all stitched. You can see I've got the picot, the zigzag right up to the edge of the picot. And now what I'm going to do is trim back the seam allowance up, butt up against that edge there. This will be held back, the channeling there. We're going to trim all the way back and then turn that under. Now, if this won't quite turn under there, we need to just get a little bit there and just trim that a little bit, the channeling there, freeing it up so it can sit right back out of the way, because that's then later going to get, so that sits like that. And I can, once I've trimmed the seam allowance, I'm going to pin that back down like that, because that channeling is then going to sit over the top. So I'll get back to you when I've pinned everything. So I've pinned all that down, you can see there, the critical points being that the where the underarm channeling is at the underarm, that's going to go back there. So this seam is turned under that way, and also here that this seam is flipped backwards that way. I've then been getting a bit confused as to, I think I'm going to stitch this in the yellow, then change to red, because I'm going to stitch the channeling down on the front with red. And while I'm doing that red, I think I'll make the straps and then come back and finish the yellow. So with this, I'm going to stitch this at the moment. I use a 3-step zigzag, 4 wide and 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, something like that, long, and I'll get back to you when I've done that. So now I've stitched all of that down, and because I've got the iron out for another reason, I'm also now going to just iron that so that this curve sits flat. And while I've changed to the red thread to stitch down the channeling, I've actually stitched this little section here. You might remember I was talking about before, I wasn't happy about this section here. So I've actually stitched around, starting here all the way around, overcast, back, and overcast again, so 3 rows, which creates kind of a herringbone stitch, which is sort of similar as to what would have happened in the high fashion haute couture fashion houses back in the 50s, a lot of hand sewing like that. So I've done that. The other thing is, I've just noticed there's a few blood spots on this perhaps from where before now they're not going to show in that area, but and there's one here. I just thought I'd mention, if people don't know, that'll be because my hands get dry and then I get blood on things. So if you actually get your own saliva, it will actually take out your own blood. I'm not going to do this because this is for somebody else, and also because I've left it too long. So I'm going to wash this in silk wash before I give it away. So I'm going to now trim back all of the, I think I already did. Oh, no, I haven't. I'm going to trim back all the seam allowance behind here, behind the channeling. And here, it's, by the way, see this little bit of elastic that's come through here? I might have said before, that usually means either that you need to go up on the size of your needle from a 70 to an 80. It's a bit late now, I've only just noticed that. Or increase the foot pressure, but I'm going to trim back the seam allowance all behind the channeling, and then that gets pinned down, and then I'm going to iron all of this flat, the channeling down that way to make that seam flat, and then I'll come back and talk to you, and I'm going to iron this underarm, and then I'll explain what we're going to do next after that. So I've ironed that channeling back. Now, be very careful not to use steam, and be very careful not to actually iron directly onto the satin here. I've just ironed back the seam here. Now, the reason I've done all those pins, the pins start here and they're coming through at the end of the channeling there. Okay. And the reason I do that is I find I'd rather have it look even from the front, even if it's not exactly even at the back. I just find because of the thickness and everything we're using, if I stitch it from the back, when it's on the front, it doesn't always look even. So now what I'm going to do is put the presser foot against here, and I do one side first. You might notice I've got the channeling out of the way there. I do one side first, and I'm going to start, over here. I've got the presser foot there, and I'm going to start with and stitch all the way around and up to the end here, and then run off the end using a straight stitch, and then I'll come back to you. So I've stitched that, and it's quite even from the front. It actually ends up not being super even on the back, but I've managed to catch all of the channeling. So now I'm going to pull all of those pins out, and then what I'm going to do is grab from the back at both ends, pull through a loop to pull. Hopefully you can see that. I'm pulling through a loop to pull through that, and then I'm going to knot that off. I'm going to do that at the front and at the underarm, and then I'm going to repeat for the other side, and then again I'll come back to you. So now I've finished there. I find it interesting, this is the 30E, and when I'm normally doing a larger one like mine, which is 30F, these will cross over, but this one isn't at this point because the bridge isn't quite as narrow there in a 30E. Next, I've pinned the channeling just on one side where it matches this here, that seam, and then I'm just going to stitch that down. I only stitch it down on one side. Then you can, if you like, put boning in there. I'll show you how we do that when they get there, and then I'm just going to secure it at those points there, and I'll come back to you when I've stitched that next bit. So now I've inserted the underwires, which for this one was a 36 orange wire, which is correct for a 30E. And then if you wanted to, you could now put some boning into this channeling, making sure when you cut the edges that you just pop them briefly over a flame to melt the edges so they don't become sharp. But I'm actually not going to do that. I actually prefer not to. I think it's more comfortable without the boning on the sides. And now I'm going to stitch in the channeling and stitch the top and bottom of this channeling. And to do that, again, remember we talked about that step height thing before we used. We're going to use that as well. And I go back, I start forward, back, forward, back, forward, back. So that's 5 passes altogether. And I use a about a 1.7 stitch length. And I do that for all of those pieces. Then while I've still got my red thread out, I'm going to do the straps. And after that, we only have to do the bra back in the yellow. Okay. I forgot to mention too, so I've done those bar tacks across to finish the channeling and to attach the boning. But after I did that, I've then trimmed the channeling flush so it sits back behind behind the picot elastic so you can't see it. Next, I've cut the elastic for the straps, 55 centimeters. I've pinned back the sliders within there, and I'm going to stitch those again using about a 1.7 stitch length. And to do that, I find it easier to offset the needle as far as possible to the left, and then I do a forward, back, forward, back, forward, back. So that's 5 passes like we did for this. And then I'll come back to you after I've done that. So once they're done, we are now going to trim back the excess on there. Then thread the elastic through the slider. And this end now, the long end, is going to get pinned to the end here. Around that curve there, butting the edge of the strap against the edge of the power net. But while I'm there, even though that does fit, because the picots are going to tuck out there and this red bit's going to be there, I'm just going to trim about 2 mil off the edge there. So you can see that now when I've put that there, this will tuck in underneath, and that would, whoops, and that will tuck in underneath. Oh, and I've now repeated that for the other side. Now, when next to stitch this, I've tried all different ways of doing this, stitching this to the top here. My current method is that I start at this end and I use a 3-step zigzag, 5 wide and about 1.5 long, and I get all the way up to here, and then when I get to there, I finish there and then try and reverse back to cover those the same 3-step zigzag to secure it. So I'll do both sides and come back to you. Okay, so now that I've done that, the next bit here is that I'm going to trim that across level with the bra back. Then you can see how I've managed to actually get that one pretty good. Oops, pretty good there, and the other one is nearly there. It's become one of my little challenges for the day to try and get those correct. Next, we're going to trim back the excess with the duckbill scissors. Next, we're going to attach the bra back fastener. Now, I always find it easier to remember to lay it out like that so I know which side goes which, because this side goes there. So while I've got the red thread still connected, I'm going to, you can see I've pinned the straps here. Now the main thing there is I just want them to look the same on each side. So I've pinned those there, and I'm going to then, you can see I've got you can see, yep. And then I'm going to, like we did with the finishing the channeling, I'm going to go forward, back, forward, back, forward 5 times. And then I usually do another row a bit further down with just 3 passes, just because I'm super fussy. So I'm going to do that and come back to you, and then we'll do the bra back, and then we're finished. So I've done that. I've got the 2 rows. I do the row of 5, and then I stitch down about 2 stitches, and then I do the row of 3, and then I pull that out, and I then cut the end there on both sides, trimming those threads. Now for the bra back, again, I've got all different ways I've done this over time. I've inserted the label. At the moment, what I do is, first of all, I use one of these clips and clip each edge to get those where I want it, and then I insert the pins in the middle, and then when I get under the machine, I pull that out and start sewing from there. And I usually do a forward, back, forward, and I stitch with a 2.4 normal stitch length all the way across, and do forward, back, forward at the other end. So I finished that side off there, and because I'm super fussy, I'm just going to pull those threads through and tie them off at the back. And for this side, same thing. I've put those clips, and then I've put the clips there. Now for that one, again, I'm going to use a straight stitch, but I'm going to dial the, move the needle over to the left to the maximum, just so that I can use the full thickness of the presser foot. And I did do an extra row on this one, actually, because I unpicked the yellow back off the red of that bra back. So it just goes to show I'm very fussy, but I think it's gorgeous. I love it. I'm now going to take some photos on the model, and next I thought I'd do a pair of matching Charlotte knickers. I also wondered too, and maybe people could feedback for me in the comments, I thought I might do a chat about underwires, wire lengths and different wire shapes. For me, that's something I'm so familiar with it doesn't matter, but I figured there might be some people who might want to hear about that again. So I thought I might do that, as well as move on to the Charlotte knickers. Okay, thank you for following, if you followed this far. Yeah, so that's the Bette bra, variation 1, lace and satin.